She has been called many things: empress, reformer, seductress, tyrant. Her name alone conjures both admiration and scandal. Catherine the Great, a woman who rose from an obscure German princess to become the most powerful ruler in Europe. She built an empire that dazzled the world, but behind her reign of enlightenment and progress lay betrayal, intrigue, and myths so shocking they still echo today. But who was the real Catherine? Was she truly the ruthless manipulator that her enemies claimed? Or was she the victim of one of the most effective smear campaigns in royal history? To find the truth, we must go back, not to Russia, but to a small Prussian principality on the icy edge of Europe. Catherine was not born Russian. She entered the world in 1729 as Sophie Friederike Augusta von Anhalt-Zerbst, a minor German princess in a world obsessed with royal connections and alliances. Her family was noble, but far from powerful. Her father served as a Prussian general, while her mother, an ambitious and calculating woman, dreamed of elevating their small household into something grander. Sophie was bright, curious, and fiercely ambitious from a young age. Unlike many princesses of her time, she read philosophy, languages, and military history, anything that might make her useful in a royal court someday. And soon that opportunity came. In 1744, a letter arrived that would change her life forever. The Russian Empress, Elizabeth, daughter of Peter the Great, was seeking a bride for her nephew and heir, Grand Duke Peter of Holstein-Gottorp. Peter was also German and distantly related to Sophie's family. More importantly, Elizabeth wanted to strengthen her ties to Prussia without giving too much power to another major house. Sophie fit the bill perfectly. Young, charming, intelligent, and politically unthreatening. Her mother wasted no time. They traveled through snow and sickness to St. Petersburg, where Sophie was presented before the Empress. The Russian court was dazzling: gold leaf, candlelight, and power wrapped in silk. To Elizabeth, who adored beauty and youth, the 16-year-old girl seemed perfect. But there was one condition: Sophie would have to convert from Lutheranism to Russian Orthodoxy. It was a test of loyalty. Without hesitation, Sophie accepted. She studied Russian feverishly, practicing the language until her tongue bled. She read Orthodox prayers by candlelight, determined to impress her new empress. When she was finally baptized, she took a new name: Ekaterina Alexeyevna, or Catherine. And in that moment, she ceased to be a German princess and became, at least in name, Russian. But behind her polite smile, Catherine knew exactly what she was doing. She had realized something that few others understood. Power in Russia didn't belong to those born into it. It belonged to those who could survive it. Her fiancé, however, was not built for survival. Grand Duke Peter was awkward, immature, and obsessed with his toy soldiers. He idolized his ancestor, the Prussian king Frederick the Great, to the point of alienating his future subjects. Catherine later wrote that she had never met a man less suited to rule. Their marriage in 1745 was a spectacle, but behind the golden doors of the palace, it was a disaster. Peter drank heavily, mocked his wife in public, and spent his nights staging mock battles with miniature armies. He was infatuated with his mistresses and showed little interest in Catherine except to insult her intelligence and lineage. For a time, she was isolated, ignored, and dangerously out of favor. But Catherine was patient. She studied the court, learned its politics, and quietly built alliances with key nobles and guards. She began cultivating her own identity, the image of a devoted, rational, and compassionate Russian woman. She was careful never to criticize Peter directly, but those around her began to whisper, perhaps she would make a better ruler than he ever could. At night, she read Voltaire, Diderot, and the works of the Enlightenment thinkers who were shaking Europe's foundations. By day, she charmed her rivals and kept her enemies guessing. Even as her marriage fell apart, Catherine's position grew stronger. Then, fate intervened. In 1761, after years of waiting, Empress Elizabeth died. Peter ascended the throne as Peter III. And within months, his disastrous rule began. He pulled troops from key military campaigns, angered the Orthodox clergy, and humiliated his nobles with pro-Prussian policies. And while the empire seethed, Catherine watched, quietly, strategically. She had played the dutiful wife long enough. As one witness later put it, she saw that the crown was rolling in the dust, and she was the only one who dared to pick it up. By the summer of 1762, Russia was about to see one of the boldest coups in European history. It was the summer of 1762, and the air in St. Petersburg hung thick with tension. The new emperor, Peter III, had been on the throne for barely 6 months, and already he had managed to alienate nearly every group that had once supported him. The church despised his Protestant sympathies. The army detested his admiration of Prussia, Russia's sworn enemy. The nobility whispered that he was reckless, un-Russian, and incapable of ruling. Catherine listened to those whispers carefully. She knew that if she waited too long, her husband's incompetence could pull the empire down with him. But she also knew that acting too soon could cost her everything: her life, her child, and the fragile alliances she'd built. So she began to move quietly, one piece at a time. The first step was securing the loyalty of the Imperial Guard, the elite soldiers stationed in St. Petersburg who had the power to make or break an emperor. Catherine charmed their commanders personally, visiting barracks under the pretext of thanking them for their service. She spoke to them as soldiers, not subjects, promising loyalty to the army and to Russia itself, not the man who ruled it. Many of these men had fought under her father-in-law, the great Peter the Great, and they saw in Catherine his same confidence and strength. At the same time, she cultivated key allies among the nobility, including the powerful Orlov brothers, especially Grigory Orlov, who would become both her political partner and her lover. The Orlovs were not just courtiers. They were soldiers with real command and real influence. They became her shield, her sword, and her whisper network. On the surface, Catherine played her role flawlessly. She dined with her husband, smiled at his mistresses, and acted the obedient wife. But beneath the gold and velvet of the court, letters were being sent, bribes exchanged, and alliances sealed in candle-lit rooms. Then, in July 1762, word reached her that Peter planned to have her arrested. The time for subtlety was over. At dawn on July 9th, Catherine rode to the barracks of the Izmailovsky regiment, dressed not as a queen but as a soldier, wearing a green uniform and silver epaulettes. Witnesses said she mounted her horse with the confidence of a commander, not a consort. When she addressed the soldiers, her words were simple and electrifying. "I have come to you for protection. The emperor has betrayed Russia, but I will never betray her." The soldiers fell to their knees, shouting their loyalty. Within hours, she had secured the support of nearly every regiment in St. Petersburg. The coup spread like wildfire. While Peter drank and played music at his summer palace in Oranienbaum, Catherine marched into St. Petersburg to the cheers of thousands. She entered the Cathedral of Our Lady of Kazan, where she was officially proclaimed Empress Catherine II of Russia. By the time Peter realized what had happened, it was too late. His army had deserted him, his ministers had fled, and the woman he had mocked for years now controlled the empire. He signed his abdication without a fight, surrendering both crown and life. A few days later, Peter III was dead, officially from hemorrhoidal colic, though few believed that. Rumors spread that he had been strangled by one of Catherine's supporters. She never admitted it, but she never denied it either. At 33 years old, Catherine had done the impossible. She had taken an empire without a single battle, a coup so swift and bloodless that even her enemies called it brilliant. Yet as she stood in the grand halls of the Winter Palace, newly crowned and surrounded by gold and applause, she must have known that taking the throne was only half the battle. Keeping it would require more than courage. It would require genius, and Catherine had plenty of that. In the early years of her reign, she worked tirelessly to stabilize her rule. She sent letters of reassurance to nobles, reduced certain taxes, and spoke directly to the Senate, promising reform and order. Her charm and intelligence disarmed critics and inspired allies. But more than politics, Catherine wanted to transform Russia's soul. She believed that the country could be both powerful and enlightened, that it could stand shoulder to shoulder with France, England, and Prussia, not just in war, but in philosophy, science, and art. So, she began what would become one of the most remarkable reigns in history, a reign that fused ambition, intellect, and scandal into something uniquely her own. She corresponded personally with Voltaire, the great philosopher of the Enlightenment, who praised her as a northern star, guiding Russia out of darkness. She read Montesquieu and Diderot, and even invited Diderot himself to St. Petersburg, where they spent hours discussing the future of humanity, law, and governance. Catherine called herself the servant of the state. She envisioned a government based on reason, not tyranny. But she was too practical to forget that reason only worked when backed by power. She established schools for women, encouraged vaccinations, reformed local governments, and drafted a new law code, one that reflected equality before the law, at least in theory. But Russia was vast and deeply traditional, and progress came slower than she hoped. Still, her energy seemed boundless. Her intelligence was matched only by her charisma. Visitors to her court described her as magnetic, her eyes bright, her voice confident, her manner warm but commanding. Even those who opposed her politically found it hard not to admire her. But as her influence grew, so did the envy and gossip. Catherine's personal life, particularly her relationships, became the favorite subject of European rumor. The most powerful woman in the world, it seemed, could not escape being defined by the men in her bed, and soon the whispers of admiration would turn to scandal. Power had never come easily to Catherine, and once she had it, she refused to let go. By the 1770s, she had not only secured her throne, but reshaped the entire image of the Russian monarchy. Where her husband had been ridiculed, Catherine commanded respect. She was not just a ruler, she was an idea. Under her reign, Russia became a center of art, science, and philosophy. She built schools, founded libraries, and corresponded with Europe's greatest minds. Voltaire called her the miracle of the North. To others, she was the embodiment of enlightened despotism, a monarch who spoke of liberty while ruling with an iron hand. But Catherine was no idealist lost in books. She understood the brutal truth of empire, that progress often came drenched in blood. In 1768, she led Russia into war against the Ottoman Empire, a conflict that would define her rule. The Russian army, under her chosen generals, achieved stunning victories, capturing territory along the Black Sea and asserting Russia's dominance as a European power. For the first time, Russia was feared, not just as a distant land of cold and mystery, but as an empire to be reckoned with. As her armies expanded outward, Catherine expanded inward to culture, architecture, and myth-making. She ordered the construction of the Hermitage, her grand art museum, and filled it with masterpieces from across Europe. She adorned St. Petersburg with neoclassical palaces and triumphal arches. Visitors to her court described a woman who was endlessly in motion, reviewing troops one day, discussing philosophy the next, then laughing over dinner with ambassadors and poets. She could be sharp, witty, and intimidating all at once. But even as she ruled like a goddess, she was still a woman. And Europe never let her forget it. The gossip started in whispers about her lovers, her appetites, her supposed unnatural desires. Every act of independence became scandal. When a king takes a mistress, it's expected. When a queen does, it becomes a moral outrage. Her most famous love was Grigory Potemkin, a brilliant soldier and politician who shared her ambition and intellect. Together, they dreamed not only of Russia's future, but of transforming civilization itself. Potemkin helped her reorganize the empire's administration, expand its borders, and secure the newly conquered Crimea. Their love was tempestuous, intellectual, and deeply emotional, a bond that went beyond politics. Even after their affair cooled, their partnership endured. Catherine called him the most extraordinary man of my time. And yet, the myths about her personal life only grew wilder. Enemies spread grotesque stories, that she had countless lovers, that she died in an obscene way, that she was driven by uncontrollable lust. These were not just insults, they were weapons. In a world ruled by men, a woman's power had to be explained away by her supposed sins. Catherine's sexuality became a political caricature, a way to reduce a genius to a scandal. But her own letters reveal a different story. A woman who longed for companionship, who loved deeply, and who used her charm as just another tool in her political arsenal. Still, the deeper truth was this. Catherine understood image better than anyone. She curated her legend meticulously, commissioning portraits that depicted her not as a fragile monarch, but as the modern incarnation of Minerva, goddess of wisdom. She walked through palaces lined with marble busts of philosophers, generals, and herself, blending myth and monarchy into a seamless vision of power. But for all her strength, there were shadows beneath the gold. In 1773, the empire was shaken by the Pugachev rebellion, a massive peasant uprising led by a man claiming to be her late husband, Peter III, miraculously returned from the dead. For a moment, Russia teetered on the edge of collapse. Villages burned, nobles were murdered, and armies defected. Catherine's response was ruthless. She crushed the rebellion with overwhelming force, executing its leaders and tightening her grip over the serfs. The Empress of Enlightenment had shown that reason alone could not hold an empire together. Only fear could. It was a turning point. The idealism of her early reign gave way to pragmatism. She continued to write to Voltaire and Diderot, but her words grew more guarded. She had seen too much of human chaos to believe purely in philosophy anymore. By the 1780s, Catherine was the undisputed ruler of an empire stretching from the Baltic to the Black Sea. She annexed Crimea, expanded into the Caucasus, and began carving up Poland in the infamous partitions, reshaping Europe's borders with cold precision. Every victory made her both admired and feared. Foreign diplomats praised her brilliance even as they accused her of hypocrisy, speaking of freedom while ruling millions of peasants who had none. But Catherine never apologized for her contradictions. "I know myself," she once wrote. "I am not a man. I am not a woman. I am a monarch." To her, power was not a sin. It was survival. And yet, as she aged, she must have felt the weight of her legend pressing against her. The scandals, the wars, the betrayals, all of it would one day be reduced to a handful of words in a history book. Still, she worked tirelessly to ensure that her vision, not her enemies', would be the one remembered. She modernized the empire's cities, reformed trade, strengthened the navy, and founded hospitals and orphanages. She wrote plays, essays, and political treatises. In her final years, she was still at her desk before dawn, signing decrees with steady hands long after most rulers would have retired into luxury. But time, as always, is undefeated. In November of 1796, Catherine suffered a stroke. The empress, who had conquered hearts and nations alike, was found collapsed on the floor of her chambers. She died the next day, quietly, without the drama that had defined her life. She left behind an empire larger than any woman had ever ruled. and a legacy more complex than any historian could untangle.